family tells me I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment. They may be right, they may be wrong. Let's see what you think, okay? So I decided of my own free will to do a master's degree, which is probably enough to get most people frustrated. It's this long process of reading books, writing papers, and attending classes. If you don't like doing those things, don't do a master's, Roy. Lucky for me, although I've been frustrated with it from time to time, I've actually mostly enjoyed myself, clearly a little bit something, until this semester, that is. You see, this semester, this is the optional summer semester, the one where I could be resting, taking it easy, hanging out downtown in a cafe, reading some nice, relaxing books down by the waterfront on a warm day. This semester, I decided to take Hebrew. And not just any Hebrew class at that. I decided I was going to do the equivalent of 2 full semesters in 2 months. 2 semesters of vocabulary, grammar, and translations condensed into 8.5 weeks. I did this knowing that memorization is not my strong point. I did this for a course that is basically memorization. The words on the cards on the screen are just a small handful of this week's memorization words. Theoretically, I can tell you what all of them mean. I hope. On the plus side, having started at the beginning of May with a slight knowledge of a few letters of the Hebrew alphabet, by the end of June I am told that I am going to have translated through the entire book of Jonah. If it happens. On the minus side, to get there, I have spent most of the month of May deeply frustrated trying to make sense of all of these lines and squiggles. Maybe my family's right. Maybe I am a bit of a glutton for punishment. Have you ever been frustrated? I know. You're all very kind, exceedingly patient people here who would never get frustrated at anything, right? Never frustrated with the traffic, never frustrated with your neighbors, your bosses, your kids, your parents, your siblings, your partners, your sports teams, Leaf fans. What happens to you when you get frustrated? Yes, that was just for Rob. When I get frustrated, my insides start to churn a bit. My jaw tightens, my shoulders rise up. If you catch my frustration right at its beginning, you might notice that I'm a little testy when I speak, that my sentences get a little more choppy, that my answers come out a bit more strongly than usual. But if I don't deal with that right away, then it doesn't take long before it turns into sarcasm, some passive-aggressive banging of cupboard doors, maybe something worse. I can tell by the looks on the faces of everyone here, I am the only one this ever happens to. But I'm not perfect. 1 or 2 hammers thrown in Roy's shop. Okay, it's not just me. So I was thinking a lot about this the past month, and it strikes me that we as humans, we get frustrated for a lot of reasons, but often the biggest underlying reason for our frustration is that there is a disconnect between what we think should be happening, the way we think that the world should be working, and the actual experience we have of the world as it is right in front of us. And given the realities of life in the world today, that can leave us open to an awful lot of frustration, I think. For better or for worse, I'm one of those people for whom the schooling that I have chosen to do has come pretty easily to me. It makes up for the fact that other things like walking or lifting or carrying or holding a microphone for an entire sermon are huge challenges. But it means that when I started Hebrew, there was a disconnect between how I thought that this should go, my usual experience of how I should be able to do school, and the actual reality of what I have experienced with these cards. And the thing is, that disconnect doesn't just happen with the little frustrations in life, like Hebrew homework, or who's going to do the dishes from yesterday, or walk the dog, or get up with the toddler for the 9th night in a row. This disconnect also happens with the big things in life. We get sick, and we go to the doctor, and we expect that the doctor is going to tell us what's wrong with us and give us a diagnosis and a cure. Someone goes into hospital for an easy procedure and ends up in the ICU. One of your colleagues seems to win every single contest that they ever enter, but nothing ever seems to come your way. After years of loyalty to your company, you're downsized because your experience costs the company more than their cost-saving measures are willing to give. Or after years of faithfully paying your rent, your landlord decides to evict you so that he can realize the rent increases he sees on other properties, leaving you with nowhere to call your own. Your partner cheats on you. Your teenager seemingly rejects all your values and care. There are 1,000 ways that life isn't fair, and while many of us aren't great at keeping a regular time of prayer, when we find ourselves in these positions, when we get desperate enough, we often, eventually after we've tried everything else, we turn to God. That's what happens in our passage this morning. So let's read the first part of it together. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill, so the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." This all checks out so far, right? Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are siblings who live in Bethany, near Jerusalem. Over the years, the three have become friends of Jesus, supporters of him and his disciples. In other passages, we find stories of Jesus and the disciples eating at their house, spending time listening with rapt attention to what he has to say. In the church I grew up in, the goal was that we would have a personal relationship with Jesus. And although that phrase can feel a bit disingenuous for some of us here today, I think Mary, Martha, and Lazarus truly had a personal relationship with their friend Jesus, the way I have a relationship with Carol Ann, or with Bev, or with Taya, or with so many of you that are part of this community. And just like you or I would do if something was wrong, if someone was sick in our family or one of our kids was really struggling, the sisters sent a message to Jesus to tell him that Lazarus is ill. Now, I did learn something interesting in Hebrew this week. In English, we often try to not use the same word in our sentences or our paragraph over and over again, right? Especially at a master's level, you're really encouraged to use synonyms to change it up, to not say, I argue, I argue, I argue, I argue, but to say, I contend, I assert, my argument is, and then change it up, right? That's how we're supposed to do it. But the Greek New Testament doesn't do this because often it's trying to copy what they did in the Hebrew Old Testament. This is a way of speaking in the Bible that we kind of miss in a lot of our translations. It's that if there's an important theme to the story, then they repeat that word over and over and over again throughout the passage, so you'll know this is the big point. Don't miss it. Maybe it's a way to help people remember the stories better in what was often an oral culture. I'm not sure yet. But this is one of those passages where the approach actually comes through in our translation. So I want us to try something a little different. I'm going to read out all the small words. here, but I want you to help me read the words that are in bold and underlined. Do you think you can do that with me? It's 3 words, and they're the same word. Okay, so now a certain man was Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is. Very good. You can give yourselves a, yeah, that. Thank you. So clearly, what's important in this introduction is that Lazarus is, I was going to say healthy. How did I miss that? We don't know what was wrong with him. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus didn't know what was wrong with him either. Whatever it was had likely come on quite suddenly, since Jesus had only just left the area, and was clearly quite bad given what happens as the story progresses. Maybe he got pneumonia and there were no antibiotics. Maybe he got really, really bad food poisoning and they couldn't get him rehydrated properly. Maybe with modern medicine, whatever it was would barely have been a blip on the radar. But whatever it was happening to Lazarus 2,000 years ago. And at that point, it was deadly. So I think it's important to pause here and think about what they expected would happen. What did the sisters think was going to happen when they sent a message to Jesus? At this point in time, they knew that Jesus could heal the sick. Maybe they'd heard stories. Maybe they'd seen Jesus heal someone in Bethany. Maybe someone had even come to their house when Jesus was staying with them, and Jesus had healed them right there and then in front of them. Whatever the case, they know that Jesus loves them, like we know our friends love us. They know Jesus has the capacity to heal, like you know which of your friends has a truck and sometimes is willing to help people move. They know their brother is sick and not likely to survive, and so they send word to Jesus asking him to come and heal their brother. It's the most logical human thing to do. And you know what else is logical and human to do? To expect that Jesus will answer. To expect that he's going to drop everything to come to their aid during this terrifying moment. Instead, this is what happens. But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. The sisters sent a messenger to their friend Jesus. His name in Hebrew is Yeshua. And this is how it's written in Hebrew. This is how it's transliterated. This is how you can sort of sound it out. This is the Hebrew word for salvation. This is the name given to Jesus. So the sisters sent a message to Yeshua, to the God with skin on that they had fed and hosted and talked late into the night with, to tell him that one of his best friends was dying. And Jesus dilly-dallies. Jesus purposely, intentionally, and explicitly does nothing for 2 more days. Have you ever prayed a prayer like these sisters did when they sent this message to Jesus? Have you ever prayed for something that mattered so deeply to you that you knew your world would crumble to pieces if your prayers were not answered? Have you ever prayed those prayers only to feel like God was ignoring them? I have. Maybe it was the time you were down to what felt like the last cent, but the month still had days or even weeks left to go. Maybe it was a time when you or your loved one was sick and the burden of living in pain-filled agony or of full-time overwhelming care felt impossible to carry anymore. Maybe it was the moment you received news that someone you loved had been given a palliative diagnosis, that their life would be measured in hours or days or weeks when instead of the years you had hoped you would have together. Maybe you prayed. Maybe you asked your church to pray. Maybe you begged with tears streaming down your face, only to face what felt like a wall of silence, to be left feeling like God couldn't be bothered with you or with your concerns. Maybe the best you got was the equivalent to someone quoting the verse, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways," as if to tell you that your concerns or your pain were nothing to God. That's what it feels like happened to Mary and Martha. They sent the message. These inner circle friends of Jesus sent a message with the fastest, most trustworthy messenger they could find to beg Jesus to heal their brother. Now, the messenger didn't get lost. Jesus received the message. He could have dropped everything for his friend. From other passages of Scripture, we know that he could have pronounced healing from afar and followed after to celebrate the newly restored Lazarus. He could have even just sent a message back to the sisters assuring them that he had a plan and it was going to look bad for a little while before he got there, but they should hold on to hope. And he did none of it. His response seemingly defies expectation, and so we and the sisters are left frustrated. Of all the people alive at the time who could have asked Jesus for healing, the sisters perhaps have more reason to expect a response than almost anyone else. And Jesus still actively, intentionally, does nothing. He seems confident that he has a plan. He seems to think that everything's going to work out okay in the end, but he doesn't tell the sisters that. He doesn't explain what's happening to the disciples. Instead, for the next 2 days, he waits around. Can you imagine the sisters at this point? Can you imagine them sitting beside their brother with one eye on the task of cooling his fever with wet cloths and another on the window, staring down the road, hoping to see the familiar sight of Jesus and his followers? Can you imagine the hope fading from their eyes as their brother's breathing got more and more shallow? Can you imagine the knot of anger and frustration forming in their bellies, the tightness in their jaws as the tears streamed down their faces and they slowly and gut-wrenchingly lifted the sheet to cover his lifeless body? Jesus, their friend, Jesus who heals, Jesus, God with skin on that they have fed themselves, had not come. He had not replied. He had not even sent a message. He hadn't pulled through. Far from the healing that they had hoped for, their brother was dead. These unmarried or widowed sisters had lost their protector, their provider, their brother. What would happen to them in the days, the weeks, the months ahead? How would they survive? How would they cope? How would they carry on? And where was Jesus in all of this? Where was God? Where was Yeshua, their salvation, when their brother needed saving? Maybe it was at this very moment that Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Let's go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Well, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying that, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going to go there to wake him up." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right then." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was merely referring to shh. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Yeah, let's also go, that we may die with him." So it's clear that there are some reasons why Jesus and his disciples might not want to have gone back to Judea. As Nathan talked about last week, he had only just escaped again from being stoned. Thomas, at least, is convinced that if they go back to Judea, that it won't just be Lazarus who is dead, but it will be all of them as well. But Jesus is clear now that Lazarus is dead, that now is the time for him to go to Judea, to Bethany, where there are people interested in having him killed. Not only that, but he has the audacity to say that he is glad that he wasn't there when Lazarus was sick. That somehow this is a good thing, even though none of this feels good at all. So Jesus and the disciples head off for Bethany. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews who had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." So Jesus gets to Bethany, not only to find that Lazarus is dead, like the daughter of the synagogue leader that Jesus brought back to life in Mark 5:21-43, the one who had only recently died and was still laid out on her bed in her room, her body perhaps still slightly warm. No, Lazarus is dead, like dead. Like he's wrapped in burial cloths dead. He's in the tomb dead. He's stone over the entrance dead. He's smelly even with the burial spices dead. And this is when Jesus finally shows up. This is when he figures he ought to make an appearance. Unsurprisingly, by the time he arrives, there's a large crowd around the sisters. The house is full to brimming. Maybe the house is surrounded, even, with those who have come to pay their last respects and comfort the sisters. Jesus arrives at the outskirts of this crowd, and somehow the murmurs of those between him and the center of the house make it to Martha's ears, and I picture something in her snapping. I picture her standing up and forcing herself through the crowd with such passion and intensity, such grief and frustration that the mourners almost melt away in front of her. She gets to Jesus, and what does she do? She lets him have it. She rips into him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Some people jump to seeing that she still believes that Jesus could have healed him, that she still believes in Jesus' capacity to bring healing and wholeness. And yes, that's true, but first, we need to see that she is frustrated. She is angry. She is distraught. She is overwhelmed by grief. And from exactly that place, and with all of that feeling, she leans into Jesus. And she's not the only one. A little later, her super pious sister Mary finally comes out to see Jesus. And when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Don't get confused. This knelt at his feet sounds so calm and demure, so submissive, even polite, but I think if you think that, we might have lost something in the translation somewhere. Because even in this cleaned up, pared down version of the story, there is still recrimination in the words that she says. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. As I said, I'm taking Hebrew, not Greek this semester, so I can't go back to the original Greek yet and offer my translation of Martha and Mary's words. But what I hear in their statement is, Jesus, how dare you? You could have done something about this. You could have changed this outcome. It didn't have to be like this. Now, I grew up in a world where it wasn't okay to get mad at God. It was barely okay to get mad at a partner who had an affair or a boss who fired you without cause. It certainly wasn't okay to get mad at your parents or at your siblings, although parents were allowed to get mad at their kids, obviously. But it really wasn't okay to get mad at God. And I wondered whether this was just something that I had picked up on or whether this was like a general, if you grew up in the church thing, but apparently not. Apparently this was our little tiny branch of Christianity. Because when I asked a few of you this week if it was okay to get mad at God or not, to express that anger at God, I was really impressed that pretty much everyone I spoke to knew that this was not only totally okay, but it was logical, even healthy, to get mad at God. Took me a long time to learn that. But in case you didn't know it, or in case it's been a while since you acted on this knowledge and came to God with your anger and frustration, I want us to notice the way that both sisters approached Jesus. If you had been here. There is trust in these words, yes, but there is also accusation. There is also recrimination. There is grief and anguish and so much frustration. There is a disconnect between how they thought the story should and would go and what actually happened. Their faith in Jesus' theoretical capacity to heal may not be shattered, but their experience that week has left them devastated, full of hurt and pain, and they respond exactly as we can, by railing at God with skin on in the flesh. I don't get to finish this story today. Nathan and Roy are going to finish it over the next several weeks. We're going to draw this out. So the tension is where we're left with. And I think that's okay. Because me and my Hebrew class aren't the only thing that we are collectively frustrated about this week. I canvassed some folks informally on Facebook this week to get some ideas about what we were frustrated about, and this is what I heard. I heard about frustrations related to the pandemic, frustrations about physical pain and ill health and slow recoveries. I heard about loneliness and fakery in relationships, sympathy and care that only went skin deep. Some of the people who responded were frustrated about their family circumstances, like the struggles of being a single mom. Others were frustrated at the irrelevance and sometimes pointlessness of their jobs, or the lack of productivity and efficiency of themselves and others. Some felt frustrated because they couldn't control what the future was going to look like. Some were frustrated about lack of housing, frustrated at unresolved family trauma, frustrated in anger at the loss of loved ones years too soon. War, money issues, politics, the price of gas, and the church were all points of often valid frustration for people who responded. Some were frustrated at their kids, some at their parents, some at their partners, some at the lack of a partner, and some at themselves. Our frustrations abound, apparently, and I'm sure I've barely scratched the surface. In the weeks to come, we'll get to Jesus' response and how the story ends, and maybe some of that will hold some answers for us. But for today, this morning, I want to invite you to lean into the frustration. Like the sisters, I want you to hear the whispers that Jesus has arrived, and I want you to storm out of the house to see him. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up, and they're going to play for us for a little while. And as they do, I want you to force your way through the crowd. I want you to come right up to Jesus with your finger outstretched and your voice raised. I want you to stomp your feet and shout to the heavens. I want you to voice your hurt and your anger and your frustration at Jesus. Be honest in your prayers and in your worship. I want you to tell him how you feel. Mary and Martha's story proves that this is a safe thing to do. There will be no lightning bolts from heaven. These big emotions that we have in us sometimes feel overwhelming and terrifying, and so we try to bottle them up and avoid them. But Jesus is here, and Jesus can take it. And I invite you to use this space to tell him how you feel. Let's pray. Jesus, we have come to you. We have sent our messages to you, and we have begged you and pleaded with you to come to our rescue, to come to our aid, to fix the hurt and the pain, to make the story end differently than what it looks like it has no choice but to do. And sometimes you have shown up so quickly and so faithfully, and we know you are capable of it. And sometimes it feels like you're dilly-dallying. And we don't know what to make of that. And we are left frustrated and angry. And I don't have the answers because the story doesn't finish just yet. But God, today, Jesus, thank you that we can come to you and we can yell at you about it. Thank you that there is space. Thank you that you showed up even to let Mary and Martha say what they needed to say. Would you show up today and let us say what we need to say as well? Amen.